Hello and welcome to the latest of my deep dive videos. Thanks for joining me, astrologer Patrick Arundell. Today I'm going to be exploring a rather appropriate subject in terms of deep dives, the retrograde of Neptune, the planet which governs the sea and water, which begins on the 30th of June. Now this is going to go on for 22 weeks. It's about 42% of the year, so that's a huge amount of time. What are the themes of Neptune, particularly in its host ruling sign of Pisces, where it's been since 2012? It's going to move into Aries in 2025 briefly before rewinding into Pisces. So we're coming into the final phase of its influence in this sign, but also when the event exactly occurs, what are the other planetary influences, what's the birth chart of this event. I'm going to share that with you, and there's two major events in September that I'd like to also inform you about. I'm then going to go on to share each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces to give you a flavour of what you can expect during this period of time. If you're new to my channel, it's great to have you with us. If you have any thoughts, please feel very welcome to share them. I do try to interact with as many as possible. This is very much a community, but I'd be honoured if you would subscribe. I work very hard at producing videos, and your support means everything to me and helps me to grow the channel. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. If you're a returning visitor, it's lovely to have you with me once more. As always, if you'd like to get your free written daily horoscope fired to your device each morning, please see the subscription link below. Now first off, I just want to go through the basics. This event occurs on June the 30th, as I mentioned, Universal Central Time, for 22 weeks, and it begins when Neptune's at 27 degrees and 41 minutes, and it inverses just under 3 degrees. It gets back to 24 degrees and 53 minutes. Now Neptune goes in around about 14-year cycles, and it moved into the sign of Pisces, which it co-rules, is the co-regent of, in 2012. In terms of time, universal time, it occurs at 9 p.m, 6 minutes and 16 seconds. So I did the exact maths on this. Now on the screen now, I'm showing the event chart. Now I'm showing this in terms of the solar event, and we can just see that Neptune's just tucked up there in the 12th house, which is very much to do with our subconscious. It's to do with the more spiritual dimension of our situation, which of course Neptune governs. I'm going to revisit that event chart shortly, but let's just look into the main themes of Neptune itself. As I mentioned before, very much to do with water, the sea, and its ruling glyph is the trident. And I think we've all become much more conscious of the trident with the Ukrainian situation. And I would imagine that a lot of you would share with me our thoughts for all the suffering that has gone on there, and hoping that things can start to go in a better direction. But the 12th house and Neptune and the sign of Pisces are all very much to do with spirituality and faith and intuition. And I read somewhere today, somebody I know shared the things that happen to me when I don't listen to my inner voice. So that intuition can be crucial, but also it's very much to do with creativity. So if you're someone who really enjoys photography or video making, or you're great at website design or art in any way, this is very much to do with Neptune's ability to project an image very successfully. But it also can be very much to do with illusions. And that's particularly important on this event. I'm going to share with you that wheel again now, because you can see that Neptune is in what's known as a quincunx, within about 3 degrees, 2.5 degrees, with Mars in the sign of Leo. Now Mars in Leo is very proud, and it's pretty close to Venus, and in the sign of Leo this confers great confidence and an ability to strut one's stuff. But Neptune's just reminding us of the potential for illusion. So where we may feel that we're projecting a very confident aura, that we're getting across the best of our talents in an upbeat and fun way, we need to be aware of what our motivation is, because a quincunx makes it difficult to integrate our energy. So we could project with that Leo, particularly with the part of fortune there in Leo as well, that sort of loud and proud energy. But Neptune could be a little bit of a tripwire for some of the things that we might try over this next 22 weeks. So important, if we are trying to share talents and creativity, that we're truly aware of having a joined up approach between how we feel about it and the action that we take, very much to do with Mars. But when Mars and Neptune are in league, because Mars is very much to do with instant gratification and desire, and in Leo pride, it could be that we can kid ourselves, we can delude ourselves in terms of the way that we go about things, whether it is to do with our talents or it is to do with our love life. Now, in a beautiful way, if you're a musician, for example, this combination can give a platform to share talent, to entertain, a little bit of fantasy, but also Neptune can be very much about escapism. And we do seem to have, whether it is with prescription medicines or stuff that people take on a more recreational basis, we do seem to have an explosion of issues around any kind of escapism, you know, particularly using mind-altering substances, whether it's alcohol or whether it is those drugs. So because Leo and the sign, the hosting of Venus and Mars together is quite a hedonistic mix, if you are someone who loves to party, I think it's going to be important not to do so to excess over this next 22 weeks. Now, also what Neptune can do is create some confusion or some uncertainty about what to do. And what I would say is that if you are a mutable sign, and I'll share these with you in case you're not quite sure what they are. So if you're a Gemini, a Virgo, a Sagittarius or a Pisces, and you have planets in the last 5 or 6 degrees of those signs, then you could be affected by this retrograde in quite a radical way. But just remember, you don't necessarily have to be a mutable sign to be affected by this, because everybody has a birth chart. And that birth chart is not predicated just on your sun or the ascendant. It distributes planets around the 360 degree wheel. So if any of those are forging an angular link to Neptune's retrograde, in other words, a square or an opposition or a conjunction, you're much more likely to be affected by this in a challenging way. But of course the converse can be true. You could have an uplift in some ways if you have planets that forge more enabling energies. Now, if you don't know your personal astrology, please take advantage of my very special offer. And that is, if you give me 3 pieces of personal birth data of time, date and place of birth, I can produce for you your life roadmap report. This will give you searing insights into the patterns that have really predominated in your life, but also you can learn how to work with the more challenging ones more succinctly. But you get 30% off, and you also get your 12-month forecast for the next year. And if you don't know your time, my new solar package has proven very popular, and that doesn't use an ascendant, it just works with the sun. Please see the link below for more. But that information will help you to deal with this rather mysterious retrograde in a much more knowledgeable way, because you'll have the facts in front of you of how Neptune can impact you on you or not. Now, because Neptune's energy can be extraordinarily strong, like in my natal chart, I have Neptune in the first house conjunct Jupiter, which a lot of people who are involved in kind of belief type work have. Jonathan Caner had exactly the same conjunction as me in that regard in the sign of Scorpio. But also it squares up with my sun. It squares up with my midheaven. So very, very powerful influence. And when we have Neptune impacting on a natal chart, particularly the first house, it can have quite strong implications for our sense of identity. And I think because the sign of Pisces is very much about culmination, so it's coming to the end of that 14-year journey when it moves in 25 into Aries, it's going to be the start of a new period of understanding. But if you think back over that time, if there are certain parts of your life that have inspired or hugely disappointed you, the chances are that Neptune's been part of the equation. So sometimes it can see us getting a sense or a perception of a situation where we think we're listening to our instincts, but actually we need to be a bit more practical in terms of guiding ourselves, because otherwise we can get swept away because of the mutability of the sign of Pisces. Almost hard to stay rooted, anchored, so we can be in the boat but in a storm being rocked around. So it's important that with the retrograde, if our outer world has seen us trying to escape some of the reality of our inner world, that maybe we have got caught up in chasing goals that are not necessarily that good for us. It may be that we've attained something, and when we've got there, it's felt less valuable than we thought it would. So that can then create a great sense of disappointment, because what Neptune can also do is wash away. It can erode, and that is going to be particularly critical on the 19th of September when Neptune goes opposite the Sun, because it will be just after that full moon of the 14th in the sign of Pisces. And anything to do with health, mental or physical, is going to be a massive issue for us all over the following couple of weeks. I'm also going to make a direct prediction. I think President Putin is going to come under a very big challenge at that time, whether it's with his own health, or whether it is to do with deception, or it is to do with betrayal. Obviously, there's been something that's recently happened there which pointed towards something big happening, and then it's been averted. But I think there's going to be another challenge to his authority around about the middle of September. But one of the things that Neptune retrograde can do is start to erode the illusion of the way things have seemed to be, the construct that some people would, or the reality some people would like us to adhere to, but in a very positive way. So we can, from now through to the 6th of December, start to make a lot more sense of the reality of situations, so we can turn inwards. So see this Neptune retrograde as a tool for growth. And really, when the retrograde of last year came to a close, which was on December the 4th, ever since then, as Neptune's gone forwards again, perhaps we've been kidding ourselves around some of our motivations and some of the things that seem to be very important to us. So I think we are seeing already a lot of corruption is being stripped back and being revealed. And the Gemini new moon, which occurred, squared up to Neptune, and you know it is a very, very potent influence. The mutability can see people using the communicational skills of Gemini, which are obviously very quick but very nimble, and can pivot and actually use charm in some ways and wit in order to create an illusion, that square with Neptune was very, very strong. So we're seeing a lot of stuff coming into the open about all sorts of things, but particularly public figures. So we're getting a much greater understanding of where there's been slush funds, where people have done dodgy stuff, where people have kept people in the dark, because Neptune in the 12th house can be very much mushroom management. Keep them in the dark, feed them horse manure, I'm trying to be very proper, and see the mushroom grow. But obviously what we're seeing is some revelations coming in. So it's going to be really exciting in that regard. So if we can take off those rose-tinted spectacles that Neptune can create, particularly in the sign of Pisces, we can actually start to experience, because of the co-rulership of Pisces, Jupiter. Jupiter tends to get characterized by its rulership of Sagittarius, about good fortune, expansion, optimism, exuberance, and so forth. But it is the co-regent and the traditional ruler of the sign of Pisces. And it is, of course, about faith and beliefs. So we can start to try to understand much more deeply what our true motivations are. Now, some people could, for example, even if they're interested in esoteric subjects like astrology, actually find themselves checking out more traditional religions, or it could be vice versa. The people checking out astrology initially may not know that it's actually in some way to do with Neptune, but it is so important that we can perhaps reconsider some of our approach. Now, the other thing, of course, is that we currently have Saturn, the planet of limitation, in retrograde in the sign of Pisces. So I feel that where companies have shown a scant regard for the psychological well-being of their employees, or big organisations generally have been very much driven by profit, I think over the next couple of years, and I did predict this with Saturn moving into Pisces, and particularly through this Neptune retrograde, we're going to see much more consideration of people's feelings. Now, of course, there is an argument that we can go too far in that direction, and that's what I'm saying about the common sense. It's important to keep one foot on terra firma, but Saturn's great for that. You know, it's great for reminding us that wisdom, experience, the old-fashioned and sometimes a little bit more conservative way of doing things have endured simply because they're in some ways like being reliable, being punctual, turning up on time, showing good manners, being acknowledging of other people's input into situations. If we can blend the pragmatism of Saturn with the compassion of Neptune, then that's a really good thing. But it isn't always good to be so incredibly forgiving and rising above things if people have genuinely hurt us or gone through our boundaries. So Neptune makes it very difficult to create a boundary, so people can seem to penetrate into us very easily because it's so gaseous, and that again is where Saturn, I feel, can be very useful to us. But there's no doubt about it that our soul progression in this life is strongly influenced by Neptune, and of course Pluto is the planet of transformation, and guess what, they've been broadly in touch for absolutely years in a sextile. So on the screen now you can see that Neptune 27 Pisces, and there is Pluto at 29 Capricorn. But I also want to just point out about the midpoint, and the midpoint of this event is occurring in Virgo in the 6th house of practical well-being, and of course Virgo very much about that. And Neptune is just about on the 7th house cusp of that midpoint. The Sun is our core energy, our desire to achieve things of the physical nature. It's our outer world. The Moon, our inner world, where we nurture, where we're receptive, and where we get security. So the balance of this chart with the Moon in Sagittarius at 3 degrees and the Sun at 8 degrees in Cancer is that midpoint in Virgo. So it's asking us to stay a little grounded. That's going to be good for us. I should also say that Saturn, which I mentioned before, in a very positive angle to the Sun and Mercury. Now the Sun and Mercury, the day after this event, are actually going to come into Cazimi, where Mercury, as we see it from planet Earth, is right at the heart of the Sun, amplifying its qualities. But in House 4, it's all about security. So the psychological part of our existence, Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, House 12, is one that we must embrace. Don't deny it. But we also can stay very grounded, and that's that midpoint in Virgo. So that's good stuff. But just going back to the position of Mars and the quincunx with Neptune, remember I said that Mars is very much about instant gratification, and we must be conscious of hedonism. Also, when Neptune and Mars are in angle in a tense way, it also can create the potential for tricksters. So, you know, if you go on a date with someone and they're enormously glamorous and just absolutely, you know, what you see as being ideal in terms of their physical attributes, just wait until they reveal their emotional and psychological patterns, and that will protect you. It's not to say that it's going to go wrong, just be cautious. Check out, Saturn is in a square with the Moon, so we do need to be cautious through this retrograde. Now, the other thing to tell you about is we may start to think more about the ways in which we do create some escapes. I mentioned this before about drugs and alcohol, but there's some great ways that we can do this with Neptune's retrograde. So, for example, we could start journaling, start being more in touch with our emotional experiences. We may, you know, use our love of music to actually have some, you know, fantastic moments of just, you know, where it gets absolutely brilliant. I was listening to about 4 or 5 of my favourite Stones tracks earlier, and it's really great to just have that little bit of a blast. And so what Neptune can do is almost help to transport us to another place in a really positive way. That escapism doesn't have to be real bad. But also, if we're someone who's very much into healing or natural medicine, I think Neptune's very much to do with rinsing. So whilst it can wash away our shores and erode our coasts in a more negative way, in a more positive way, if we go for a spa day or we have a massage, and, you know, we have our lymph nodes massaged out, we get rid of the toxins, that's something that can be very, very positive for us. But if there is somebody or something in our lives that hasn't been very real, that actually can be quite devastating if we start to see through the process of this retrograde what they're really about. That actually can leave us feeling a little bit bereft. And sometimes I think one of the hardest things, and that's why I feel that Venus-Mars combination, along with the part of fortune, in a quincunx, but mainly Mars, with this event, is something we really need to be mindful of, because remember, Neptune can be about lies, it can be about deceit, it can be about someone telling us something that they think we want to hear, and in actual fact it's nothing like the reality. And then when we eventually see it, I think a word that would completely fit with Neptune would be being gaslit, because obviously the gaseous energy of Neptune. So please do remember that. Now, just going back to that full moon of the 14th of September, obviously Pisces is about our subconscious. It can be about where we need to retreat, it can be where we meditate, it can be where we withdraw, but it can be about our fears and anxieties and our psychological health and our spiritual domain, whereas the sign of Virgo very much about practicalities, which is where the sun will be. So I think we could all go through a little bit of low energy around the second week of September, so just be mindful of that, but also be mindful of where we're trying to do a little bit too much, be too conscientious, too giving. because the sign of Pisces is very much about sacrifice. Pisces people, if they really like someone or love someone, they can be so devotional. You probably find a lot of people who work in nursing or care work have a combination of the practicality and the precision of Virgo, but the compassion of Pisces. But it's important to know when to give to ourselves and stop going beyond that boundary, which actually keeps us safe and keeps us secure. So we do need to look at the ruler of the sign of Pisces, the traditional ruler, Jupiter. And Jupiter is actually forging a brilliant link with the Sun and a stabilizing link with Saturn. So the sextile with the Sun is very heartening and gives us a sense of confidence, but the sextile to the position of Saturn just stabilizes Saturn's tendency to be so cold and devoid of any emotion. So it kind of balances it, and of course Saturn and the Sun are in a lovely trine. So I think we can grow from this. I think we are seeing a rising in consciousness about what we're doing to our rivers and oceans, the impact of pollution, the impact of cruise ships, which I have personally quite a passionate problem with, because I feel that yes, they can create some kind of paradise for people for a couple of weeks, but what's the impact on the planet? And that's not me being a killjoy at all. And so the seas and rivers and the availability of water, and of course we've seen the Kakhovka Dam blown up in Ukraine as well. And when that event occurred, Saturn was in a square with Mercury in Gemini. However, we all need to perhaps become more conscious that if we like better quality waters, like mineral waters and so on, that every time that we buy one of those bottles or glass containers, there is an impact on the ocean in another way. So this is the kind of stuff really that Neptune's asking us to raise our consciousness up about even more. Whether you're someone who doesn't believe that climate change is really a reality, it's just a cyclical thing that happens to the Earth, or whether you're someone who thinks that human activities are impacting on things, perhaps if we use water more prudently, that would be taking advantage of Saturn's more sobering influence, and Neptune's retrograde is asking us to just check over things. Are we in touch with our emotional selves in a good way? Are we on track in being realistic about our lives? Are there certain distortions and unrealities that we need to become more aware of? Please stay with me now as I go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces. So Aries, I'm sorry if it's a little bit of a theme from some of my earlier videos, but if you recall, Saturn arrived in your 12th house on the 7th of March, but then went into the retrograde on the 11th of June. I have to report on that, and that happens to be in the same position as Neptune, which has been in your 12th house since 2012. So let's just check out what's happened since 2012. That's a lot of years. Have you had a big disappointment in that time? Have you encountered someone that you put a lot of faith in that turned out to be hugely disappointing? Or have you changed your work to actually work in an organization where it's a big place? Perhaps you're working behind the scenes in a very important role. Perhaps it's a big institution like something to do with municipal government or a hospital or a psychiatric unit. Or have you been working in something to do with end-of-life care or anything to do with supporting people in a psychological context? So Neptune may have been working its way into your situation in a positive and challenging way for the whole of those years. So this retrograde for you, in a way, you've had a lot of time to prepare, because it's about the 12th in the cycle that you've gone through. And what I find with more challenging aspects is the more they happen, the more we get the hang of them. So if you have realized this year that certain parts of your life have come to a shuddering close, it's maybe strands that you've been involved with for as long as 29, 30 years have suddenly come to an end with Saturn's arrival in your sign, in your 12th house. Neptune's been creating some uncertainty for some years in the same sector, but all of this is actually preparing you to cut away what's no longer good for you and bringing you into the present. And that's why the two lunations that occurred in your sign and the arrival of the true north node on the 17th of July are so exciting for you. So there is continuing to be a little bit of a dichotomy between some parts of your situation coming to a close or becoming more conscious of the underbelly of yourself and life, but some new growths coming through, which is really exciting. So this 22-week period is a wonderful time to think about healing, to think about rest, meditation, perhaps where you could go to places that are deeply in nature, which give you some chance for true introspection. But this will help you to move beyond your own veil and create a much greater sense of your purpose and your reality, which is going to be strengthened hugely once the true north node arrives in your sign in July. Now Taurus, for you, the sign of Pisces is exciting because you're an earth sign, so you carry the water, you conduct it really well. But of course we need to look after our ecosystem, and I think it's true to say that if you are someone that really loves swimming, the chance to get together with the type of people that you feel really comfortable with, the people that you have some kind of unity with. So if you go on a holiday during this 22-week period and you are able to take sea salts particularly, I think it will be very healing for you. But of course, the 11th house is about our future direction. The questions you need to ask yourself: are you truly at peace and at ease with how things are developing? One of the things I've learnt with life is that sometimes when we get to a particular stage in post, and we may have really set our intentions on getting there, that once we arrive, actually it's not the thing we want anymore, because we've shifted, our inner world shifted. So therefore, even though we attain that point, we want something else. So I think you could find yourself resetting your longer term aspirations. I think, unfortunately, if there are some people around you that you can't truly rely upon, the chances are they are going to be revealed. And one of the things that will accelerate this process is going to be the true north node moving out of your sign and into Aries from the 17th of July. So this is the first start of a process, I feel. We also have to know that because your ruling planet Venus is in your sector of the home, emotion and security, and Neptune is in the part of your situation to do with your idealism, if you're attracted to somebody who's never really going to feed your soul, who doesn't really understand the parts of your nature that are not to do necessarily with enjoying the good things in life, which you have such a great appreciation for. It's more about understanding where you're coming from, your deeper needs. So if there's a mismatch between what your expectations are around your love life, and there is somebody that you've been hoping is really going to play a role in your situation, I think you can use the power of Venus and Mars and the North Node in your 4th house to actually challenge the distortion that Neptune can bring. So, if there is someone you're drawn to, I think they've got to be someone who really can understand what makes you tick. And because Uranus has been stirring things up so much, just depends where your personal planets are, how much it's impacting upon you. On this particular event, Uranus is pretty close to a sextile with Neptune. So you're wanting to evolve, you're wanting to grow, but Uranus is in a very tense right angle with Mars. So I would be conscious that if you're giving away some of your individuality in order to get some of your needs for security met, that's something you've got to be cautious of. So you may feel a little bit conflicted, I sense. And because Neptune in the 11th house really is pushing you to go about things in as principled way as possible, because there is that part of you that does like creature comforts and does like sensuality, does like touch. Yes, you could get involved with someone who provides those things, but you just need to go into any situation with your eyes wide open. Gemini. Now, I mentioned before about how the Gemini new moon was impacted quite strongly by Neptune. And if we think about your ruler now, it's in the sign of Cancer, which is asking you to be mindful of resources. And that's actually forging a brilliant link with the Sun and a great link with Saturn. Saturn in your sector of success. So they're really setting a template for approaching things in a realistic way. It's just that Neptune, in the quincunx with Mars and Venus, is kind of saying to you that your ability to communicate skillfully can at times, or could at times, during the period of this event, see you almost like get yourself into a bit of a muddle, because maybe people are going to start to become much more aware of your ability to be very quick. But I feel that what people are looking for from you is not the quickness only. They want to see some solidness too. And Neptune's not great with solid. So your ideas, I feel that you have a great opportunity with Venus and Mars in Leo to really captivate people with your expression. But if your ideas are not ideas that are relatable in a practical way, I think that people could push back a little bit. So if you're trying to start a business, for example, and you need to get some support from an investor or a bank, I think it's very important that you really future-proof your idea very carefully. Love life, well, I feel that you probably will have the need to you probably find yourself drawn to someone who has something about them that's actually quite earthy and quite solid, but I still feel that you need your mentality stimulating quite a lot. Same with your work, to be honest. So just be aware that someone doesn't out Gemini you. That's what I would say for you over the next 22 weeks. So your word power can be very compelling, but it needs to be based on hard and fast facts. But you do have some support with that, with Saturn supporting your ruler and the Sun. Cancer. Now, of course, when this event occurs, the Sun is in your sign, very, very close to Mercury. Just about to merge on the 1st of July. Absolutely lovely in that cazimi. So for you, Neptune's in the part of your situation to do with travel, to do with expansion of knowledge, and of course the sign of Pisces ruled by Jupiter, which has its co-rulership, its other rulership, its singular domiciled rulership of Sagittarius. It's very much about travel and knowledge. So for you, this event occurs in the 9th house, which is rather Sagittarian. So I feel with your ruler also in the sign of Sagittarius, there may be part of you that does want to travel, perhaps learn some new skills. Anything to do with languages would be attractive, the arts, culture, of course, as usual. But just be conscious of that Saturn square with the moon, because that's in the 6th house of your situation, practicalities, and Saturn and Neptune in 9. So they're wanting you to have a bit of escapism. The moon's reminding you of your responsibilities. And also because you have the Sun and Mercury in your sign, yes, you can use a powerful dynamic. You're a cardinal sign. You know, if you can convey things in a very clear way with Saturn angling to Mercury and the Sun, all's good. But I think that, yeah, Neptune wants to see you shrug off a few responsibilities. You can be one of the most responsible members of the zodiac, but if you can get anywhere near more cultural pursuits, off the track places, if you do travel, places that have some deep history attached to them, anything to do with philosophies, will be very inspirational for you. But I think that the moon square with Saturn could see you at times feeling a bit thwarted. You're not getting all the freedom you want, unfortunately. So Leo, for you, Neptune goes into retrograde in the part of your situation that's to do with devotion, where you're most invested. This can be in an emotional way, it can be in a sexual way, it can be in a financial way. Neptune rewinding in this area is asking you to dive deep within yourself if you're unsure of where some of the outcomes you would like are currently poised. And of course Saturn has been creating quite an impact since March the 7th, and then from its own retrograde on June the 11th. It's asking you to really think about these areas very seriously. But on this particular event, there is part of you that could almost resist the energies of Neptune, because the combination of Venus, Mars and the part of fortune in your sign is giving you so much charisma. But I feel that, for example, if you're single and there's more than one admirer that's manifesting around your situation, I don't think necessarily that you should make any quick judgments. Just see how things play out a little bit further, particularly with the Sun locked in your 12th house. If you are, for example, attracted to someone who's not truly available, or you have a fascination with someone that is bordering on being a little bit obsessive, what Neptune's asking you to do over this next 22 weeks is to be very clear about what's truly right for you when it comes to those deepest commitments, but also being aware that the 8th house can be where things make way. So it can be a time of ending. So the idealism of Neptune is struggling with the realism of Saturn, and the uber self-confidence that Venus, Mars and the part of fortune are giving you needs to be measured against some of the parts of life which are not always particularly visible. So I think you need to keep your wits about you when it comes to the more psychological domain of any part of your existence. So Virgo, Neptune goes into a retrograde in your sector of relating, but also your boundaries. If you do find it a bit of a struggle at times, asserting how you feel about situations, or feeling that people take you seriously or are respectful of what you want, what Saturn's been doing since March the 7th is probably making you a bit firmer. But now with Neptune inversing through the next 22 weeks, it's also important to try to understand the spiritual dimension of relationships as well. Now at the moment, the Sun is in the part of your situation to do with longer term planning, friendships, and celebrating the things really that we have in common. But because Venus and Mars are in house 12, if you have got any unhappiness around any relationship in your situation, it doesn't just have to be a romantic one. I think really Neptune's retrograde along with Saturn is asking you to really think very deeply about those boundaries, whether you feel respected, whether you feel other people are as invested as much as you are. You can be very sacrificing and hard working. Is someone, for example, putting the same amount of effort into the domestic sphere? Because I feel that with Venus and Mars, particularly with Mars in a quincunx with Neptune, if you're not happy, however sensitive the discussions are, I think there could be a lot of frustration that is starting to boil up on the back burner. And with Uranus in the part of your situation to do with liberation and freedom, and in a tense right angle to Mars, if you're seriously unhappy, I think a relationship matter could be heading for a final decision. So Libra, think back through to 2012. Has there been a significant change around your health during that time? Have you felt that you've been doing more to support others and not necessarily getting quite the same amount of respect and appreciation back? If that is how it kind of feels, and of course you've had the complexity of Pluto in the 4th house of your situation for all but 11 weeks since 2008, and that's a very emotional part of your chart, I feel that really Neptune's retrograde could see you rethinking some of the sacrifices you do make. It's good to be a good egg, but it's vital to look after our own interests as well, because you're innately a people pleaser, and your ruler at the moment is in a very friendly, bubbly part of your situation, very sociable part with Mars. The temptation could be to just focus on that social interaction, but I feel that some way or another through till the start of December, if someone does try to put more responsibilities and obligations upon you without really appreciating how much you're putting in already, I think Neptune is asking you to perhaps be a little bit more pragmatic rather than supportive. And that is where Saturn can be of great help, because although it can in its own retrograde make you more conscious of where you need to be more disciplined about how hard you work, how fulfilled you feel, how fit you are, because it is about an energy which can say no to others, it can also give you a little bit more confidence to set your boundaries. But just about that Mars square with Uranus, because Mars is in the part of your situation which is very flamboyant at the moment, and very much to do with having a lot of sparkly exchanges with others, and it's possible that somebody could just emerge from the ether in your friendship group and be quite dazzling and tempting in terms of a romantic prospect. But whether this would hang around for long is another matter, I feel. And because your ruler Venus, along with Mars, is pretty well in a quincunx with Neptune, I feel that when it comes to even friendships, you may be reviewing those ties where it feels that, yeah, you seem to be a little bit more concerned about their welfare than they do about yours. So use Saturn and Neptune's retrograde to set your boundaries about what you will or won't do to support others, and look after your welfare, and whether it's spiritually or physically is a big part of the equation. So Scorpio, all the talk is going to be about Neptune applying the proverbial celestial brakes. But you know, it's your traditional ruler Mars that's really prominent in this particular event. It's high in the sky in the sign of Leo, where it really does give it an extra authority and self-confidence which you may be experiencing. And it's very close, of course, to Venus. So we got the passion and the power of Mars combining with the svelte charm of the planet of attraction, Venus. But they are in a quincunx with Neptune. So Neptune's in the part of your situation to do with where you want to manifest your talent, have fun, be creative. It's just that Saturn moved into this area March the 7th, went retrograde on June the 11th. And if you have got any talents, you're probably having to work pretty hard at them. But then there's another part of you that's still feeling very buoyed up and self-confident about the approach that you're going to take, and if that's the case, good for you. Just be aware, however, that Uranus, the planet of disruption, is in your sector of relating. So I feel that all of this blended together suggests that when it comes to your professional worldly goals, Leo, Mars, Venus, the part of fortune, it's important to relate to people in a way that you feel that your creativity is heard. So you're really in the mood to be heard at the moment, but Uranus on the other side of the heavens suggests that you could encounter someone who does something very unexpected, is inconsistent, or really quite erratic in their approach, and that can have an impact on what you want to achieve in terms of goals and ambitions, or showcasing your talent. Now when it comes to your love life, which of course House 5 can be about, or even your children's talents and activities, Neptune slowing down does ask you to think in a more inward way about how you can gain greater satisfaction and enrichment from either your love life or from your talents. But Saturn's saying you're going to have to work for it either way. But just don't be kidded by the amount of extra oomph and heft that Mars is giving you at the moment, because in that distorting angle to Neptune and in a tense angle to Uranus, things aren't quite what they seem. So very important that you go through the processes, and this is where Saturn can be really helpful, in a thorough, hard-working and applied way, as well as using the imagination and spirituality of Neptune. But I think this is a complex time if you are wanting to gain greater recognition or respect in your professional situation or a personal relationship. Now, Sagittarius, the timing of this event for you is really quite paradoxical, because Neptune going into retrograde in your 4th house is asking you to think much more deeply about the emotional dimension. Saturn's already in this area, so you may have been feeling some resistance and limitation, particularly since it went retrograde on the 11th of June. So those are very tender and introspective influences. But in the case of Neptune, because of the quincunx with Mars, well, Mars is in the most adventurous, freedom-loving, independent, travel-seeking part of your situation. So you can see there's a real dichotomy between those two areas. Also, Uranus is in house 6, the everyday routine, and the square with Mars could be making you feel really, really on edge. So how do we decipher all of these contrasting influences? Well, let's take it back to the Sun. The Sun's in the part of your situation, in the sign of Cancer, which is very much to do with transformations. Mercury's here too. So your thoughts need to be very attuned to understanding not necessarily what you can see. So do delve beneath the surface. You have a great curiosity, that's your great gift, and the combination of Venus, Mars and the part of fortune can prime up that desire to break out and embrace a wider view of your situation. But it could come just through knowledge, which then gets fed into your emotional responses, how you approach anything to do with where you live, how you live there, and who with. But if you are living in a situation at the moment where you feel very cramped, hemmed in, you don't particularly like the environment, maybe there's more people that you're having to share with than would be ideal, I feel, particularly with Saturn applying to the moon in your sign, on this particular event, you could be finding that truly difficult. So one of the best ways to juggle immediately with the energy that's being manifested is to get out and about and do something more active and freedom loving, even if you need to re-enter the womb, if you like, of Neptune and Saturn in your 4th house to deal with those deeply emotional issues. But one of the great things that I feel Saturn will bring over the next couple of years, it almost is going to force you to look at the emotional dynamic a little bit more, because as I've often said, Sagittarius people are so dynamic. If things go wrong, dust yourself down, go again in some kind of new, fresh and optimistic way. But that leads to a build-up of slightly unresolved emotional debris, which then can become something more substantive and more difficult to deal with. And of course, Neptune in the 4th house can be about kind of avoiding the emotional reality of situations or kidding yourself about what the reality is, and Saturn pushing you to really accept the reality. So I think this is going to be an interesting time over the next 22 weeks for you. If you're someone who's much more at peace in your inner emotional world or where you're living, I feel that this can be an event that can be very uplifting and you can expand your consciousness hugely. But if you are someone who does like to be very much on the move, doing your own thing, but are feeling very stuck around where you're living, I do think it's going to be that much more challenging for you personally. So Capricorn, the interesting thing since Saturn, your ruler, moved into Pisces on March the 7th, you may have found that people are kind of being a bit more reactive to the way that you're expressing yourself, which may have proved to be a little bit of a surprise. Or you may have found that you've developed a more serious attitude to getting your point of view across. Now Neptune, of course, has been in your third house for a long time, since 2012. If there has been a little bit of confusion or mistrust around neighbours or siblings, or perhaps your ideas have been quite fluid in that time, it wouldn't be a surprise. So the retrograde, along with Saturn's retrograde in your third house, is definitely an opportunity to think very carefully about your belief systems, the way you express yourself, but critically the way you listen too. Now Neptune retrograde can definitely create potential for misunderstandings, and it is in a quincunx with Mars, and Mars is in the part of your situation along with Venus and the part of fortune that's very much about your desire, your deep desire. So if there's someone that you're really attracted to romantically, however much of the hots you've got for them, the way you cultivate this relationship is going to be important over the next 22 weeks. If you rush it, or your expectations are a little bit unrealistic, that could be a problem. But the desire side of having Mars in your 8th house, it doesn't really get much hotter and hornier than that. In a clash with Uranus is likely to make you much more impulsive than usually is the case for someone who's known as the steady Eddie of the zodiac. So quite a lot of compulsion can be around your moves based on your thinking and the interaction you have with others. So when it comes to text messages, emails and quick bursts of conversation, however exciting some of these are, try to slow things down and just be aware that some deeper compulsions may get triggered that could see you react or act in a way which is a little bit out of character for the way that you often go about things. So Aquarius, Neptune going into retrograde in your second house is really interesting. Obviously it's my second house too in terms of my sun. So Neptune is a shimmering influence, isn't it? And it's a very compassionate one. If you've found since 2008, you've really been helping those who are less fortunate, perhaps even more than you did in the past, wouldn't be a surprise. Neptune can be very self-sacrificing and very generous in the second house. But there may have also been times when perhaps you've been almost too generous, if that is possible. I certainly think it's better to be generous to a fault than mean to a fault. But sometimes if we're giving away something, even if it's our time or support, and it ends up us feeling a little bit empty or invisible from doing that, we know that the balance between the give and the get isn't quite working. So that's something that you and I could think about through the next 22 weeks. Our traditional ruler Saturn has already been bringing some lessons to bear to this important part of life. The second house is about self-worth. It's not just about everyday money or the basic foundation of our life. And that self-worth is being tested by Saturn too, also now in retrograde. So our relationship to money, our relationship to the worth of what we spend our money on, is being asked to be reconfigured in some way, to be realistic, Saturn and the retrograde in Neptune, but not lose the idealism, but make sure the idealism is well intentioned and well shared. So it's just finding that sweet spot. But let's look at the other players in this situation. The moon in the freedom-loving Sagittarius, which chimes with your credentials for embracing that too. That's squaring with the traditional ruler of Aquarius, also in Pisces. So I don't think friendships and business necessarily are going to mix particularly favourably over the next 22 weeks. But also because Mars and Venus and the part of fortune are in such a charismatic combination in your opposite sign, you're giving out a dazzling vibe at the moment which can draw people to you. But it's important, if you're trying to get to know someone more in a relating sense, so in a more intimate personal sense, that you're conscious of those core values. It may seem very old-fashioned, and modern times are very much based on the presentational sides of people, you know, how people look, the interest they have, and blah blah. But those core values are a great barometer of how people will get on. But Neptune, of course, can distort. So you could start to get to know someone who you really feel meets all your expectations, and it feels absolutely amazing. But just be aware, you know, we have the potential with Neptune for illusions to be created. Illusions in terms of business partnerships, potentially illusions around the people you need to compete against, but also illusions potentially around relationships. So Saturn is asking you to keep it real when it comes to your core values. Don't budge from them too much, but that could at times see other people think that you're being a bit cool because of the way it applies to the moon. The other thing to say, of course, is that Uranus in the sign of Taurus, the 4th house, is clashing big time with Mars. So sudden intense disagreements or conversations are possible with family members. And again, if you're having a big dialogue with people, very important to get to what the true nub of the issue is, and that's where the distortion of Neptune can be tricky. So I think Saturn on the whole, despite its retrograde, can actually be very helpful in bringing that dose of reality. But if you are really up against it around your finances at the moment, that's not much reassurance. I apologise for that, because I know a lot of people are feeling the pinch. But I feel that what you can bring to the situation is, even if you are a bit tight for money, you have the potential to make things, to do things, to be more creative in how you go about things. So you can be a maker, you can be a renovator, you can be an upcycler, you can be someone who makes it fun to go to the charity shop. So your imagination and innovation can be very important to how you deal with your financial prospects at the moment. But when it comes to ties to others, do proceed with a little bit of caution. So Pisces, of course, Neptune is your co-ruler along with Jupiter. Jupiter on this event forges a lovely angle to Saturn, also in your sign. Saturn is more about restraint, Jupiter about growth, but also faith. Saturn in your sign since March the 7th has been asking you to ensure that you narrow your focus down onto the things that are really essential. Now that may have had somewhat of an impact on your physical vitality, particularly if you're born in the first 7 or 8 days of the sign of Pisces. But of course you could have other planets distributed around your chart which may also be angling up to the role of Saturn. That said, Neptune's retrograde, an annual event through the next 22 weeks, if you are a Pisces with energy more towards the end of the sign, and that doesn't need to just be the sun, well, what Neptune can do is it really can create some a lowering of vitality along with Saturn, but also a much more heightened sensitivity. So the upside of this is that very often Pisces people are very compassionate, tune into people with great skill, care, and a degree of sensitivity in a way which, you know, few signs can compete with, to be honest. But if you're feeling a bit sort of washed away in terms of what you should be doing with your future direction, and your own drive and individual passion seems rather diminuted at the moment, it wouldn't really be a surprise. Also, with the collection of energy in the sign of Leo, although it's very grand and people at work may be full of praise for you at the present time, it's kind of like a double-edged sword, because they're full of praise but they still want to slog you to do even more work for their benefit. So just be aware of flattery and charm at this time, particularly with Neptune applying to Mars, because it is possible that, you know, someone will say, oh, you know, you're just doing an amazing job, and that's just getting that much more effort from you. Also, your emotions are going to be very hard to disguise over the next 22 weeks, because the moon is right at the top of your solar chart in the sign of Sagittarius, and it's also in a crunch with Saturn. So if you're born through those first 7 or 8 days, I feel that things, even with your work or your professional situation, just can seem a little bit bogging down. What can you gain from all of this? Well, Uranus is in a square with Mars. That can give you a lot of added energy, but also a hyper restlessness. So try to do some exercise that burns that off, that not so much that wears you out and causes some intense fatigue. But with Mercury and the Sun combining almost perfectly on this event, what you can do is try to embrace things that give you a sense of pleasure. So whether it is a creative hobby, if you're a maker, if it's something to do with going to watch a band or a show, or meeting up with trusted friends and family to have a little bit of a laugh, I think that's going to be very important. But essentially, I think a lot of responsibilities and your sense of what's really important in terms of your individual needs are really coming under the astral microscope over the next 22 weeks. So you may have to juggle some of your hopes and expectations, the Sun, Mercury in the 5th house, with the reality of what available vitality you've got, with dealing with the expectations that others seem to have for you. So the big word for you, Pisces, is being able to say no when it's right for you to say no, and not being hung up about it.